The sky burned red over the jungle as the royal ship exploded in the distance, its fire lighting up the black trees like torches in the night. Princess Saria ran through the thick brush, her silver gown torn, her arms scratched by branches, her breathing sharp and fast. She had never been outside the royal city before, not like this, not with blood on her hands and fear in her chest. Behind her, the screams of her royal guards echoed in her mind. They had not screamed in pain, but in rage. They had turned on her, without warning, blades drawn, faces cold. Her brother Prince Vale had smiled as he gave the order to kill her, his voice smooth and sweet like poison in water. He wanted the throne, and she was in his way. She stumbled on a root and fell hard into the mud, her side aching, her vision blurry. She could hear the sharp cries of flying beasts above the jungle, watching, waiting. The pain in her leg grew worse with every step. She touched her thigh and felt the warm wetness of blood. The blast had sent a metal shard into her. She limped forward, her royal crown gone, her jewels lost, her name worthless now. Saria had always believed her people stood for honor and light. She believed peace was the future, not war, not power. She was wrong. Now she was just a girl lost in the wild, hunted by her own. The trees grew thicker, the air hotter, vines tangled around her legs, her body felt heavy like stone, her breathing slow. Darkness came fast on Zeruin, and with it came the hunters. She heard them, first the low hum of energy bikes, then the barking of Zeruin hounds, metal beasts with red eyes that never missed a scent. She crawled into a hollow tree, covering herself in dirt and leaves. She held her breath as lights passed nearby, red beams scanning the ground. One of the hounds sniffed near the tree, then turned and ran barking in another direction. She stayed still for hours, or maybe minutes. She could not tell anymore. Time felt broken. When she woke, her skin was cold, her limbs numb. Something moved near her, a shadow crouched beside the fire. She tried to scream, but her throat made no sound. The figure turned slowly. It was not Zeruin, not like her. It was something else. It had no scales, its skin was pale, its hair dark and short, its eyes strange and human. A human here on Zeruin was impossible. They had not been seen since the Great War. But here he was, crouching beside the fire, cooking meat on a stick. He turned and saw her eyes open. He reached for something, a tool, maybe a weapon. She flinched. Then he stopped, raised one hand, open palm, no threat, just calm. She blinked at him, unsure what to do. He said something in a low voice. She did not understand the words, but the tone was gentle. He handed her a metal cup filled with warm liquid. It smelled strange, but not bad. Her hands shook as she took it. She drank slowly, warmth spread through her chest. The man smiled a little, then returned to the fire. Saria tried to sit up, pain shot through her leg. The man looked over, saw her struggle. He walked over, pulled out a knife. She tensed again, ready to fight. But he only cut open her dress near the wound, cleaned it with water, and wrapped it in cloth. His touch was rough, but not cruel. He pointed at himself and said, "Jake." "Jake," she repeated. He nodded. He pointed at her. She whispered, "Saria." He nodded again, said her name slowly. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, the sounds of the jungle far away. For the first time since the explosion, she felt something strange, something soft and quiet. Safety. But it would not last. Far away in the jungle, a drone floated through the trees, scanning the ground, recording footprints. Not human footprints, but hers. And someone was watching from above, someone who knew she was still alive. Someone who wanted her finished. Forever. The sound of fire cracking was soft in the deep jungle night, and the strange scent of cooked meat floated through the air like a dream fading in the wind. Saria opened her eyes slowly, her body sore, and her vision blurred. The world around her looked strange. The sky above her was black with tiny lights, blinking like stars, but too close, too sharp. She tried to move, but her legs screamed with pain, and her breath caught in her throat. Her hands gripped the rough surface beneath her. It was not metal, not crystal, not like the palace floors she had known her whole life. It was dirt, dry, warm dirt, and near her lay a blanket she had never seen before. Then she heard a voice again, low and careful and unknown, the same one from her fading memory just before the darkness took her. The voice said something again, slow and calm and close now. She turned her head, and there he was, the human. He sat near the fire, poking at it with a stick, his face lit by orange light, shadows dancing across his sharp jaw and tired eyes. His clothes were rough, not royal, not polished. They looked used and old, but strong, built for travel or maybe war. He noticed her watching and turned his head slowly. Saria flinched and tried to push herself away, but her body failed her. The pain in her leg made her gasp. The man raised his hands open in the air and said something again, his tone soft and clear. No fear, no threat. He moved closer and showed her the bandage on her leg. Her blood had stained it red, but the wound was clean and wrapped. She looked at him confused and weak, then looked around at the cave walls, rough and round with vines hanging like curtains at the entrance. "Where am I?" she tried to say, but her voice cracked dry and thin. The man stood up and returned with a small flask of water. He offered it to her carefully. She drank with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving his. The silence was heavy, but not cold. It was strange. "Jake," he said again, pointing to himself. She remembered now. "Jake," she repeated. He smiled a little and nodded again. Then he pointed at her and raised one brow. "Saria," she whispered. He tried to repeat it and stumbled over the sounds, but she nodded anyway. They sat there for a while, not speaking, just breathing near the fire as the night whispered outside. Jake stood again and checked a small black device on his wrist. He frowned at it and muttered something in his own language. Then he walked to the entrance of the cave and looked out into the darkness, scanning the trees. Saria pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and watched him move. He was careful, like a hunter, his eyes always looking and his hands always ready. She did not understand why he helped her. She was an alien to him, and her people had fought as years ago in a war that left both sides broken and cold. He had no reason to save her, and yet he did. Maybe he did not know who she was. Maybe he just saw someone alone and bleeding and could not walk away. Or maybe he had a plan of his own. She reached for the edge of her torn dress and found the hidden pocket still there and still holding the small crystal device her mother had given her long ago. It was not much, but it carried her blood code, and it might still work if she could find a transmitter. She slid it back into the pocket before Jake could see. He returned and sat again by the fire, chewing a piece of dried meat. Then he looked at her and held out another piece. Saria hesitated. He waited. She reached out and took at her fingers, brushed against his hand. For a moment his skin warm and rough. The meat was salty and strange, but her hunger made it taste like a royal feast. Jake watched her eat and said something else, a question maybe. She shook her head. He sighed and pointed at the cave walls, then at the sky, then made an explosion with his hands. She nodded slowly, trying to understand. "Yes," she said softly. He looked at her with interest and pointed at her, then mimed a ship flying and crashing. She nodded again more firmly. He tapped his chest and then pointed out toward the jungle, as if saying it was not safe out there. Saria leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes for a moment, her body aching but her mind sharper now. This man Jake had saved her from death, but the question still burned in her heart. What would he do if he found out she was royal? That she was not just some traveler or victim. She was the heir to the throne of Zeruan, the same throne that ordered war against his kind. She opened her eyes and looked at him again. He was now checking a small scanner, a device that blinked red. His face grew hard. He picked up a small rifle and moved to the entrance, listening. Saria felt the tension rise in her chest. She pulled herself up slowly, using the wall for support, the pain biting deep, but her spirit holding firm. Jake looked back and gestured for her to stay down. Voices echoed faintly from the trees, mechanical and sharp. They spoke her language, and they were not friendly. She recognized the pattern of the royal hunters. They were close and moving fast. Jake crouched low, watching the shadows through the vines. The scanner blinked faster. Saria knew then that she had brought death to this place. She wanted to speak, to warn him, to leave her, to save himself. But he did not leave. He turned to her, his face calm and firm, and handed her a second weapon. He said something with a slight grin and tapped her chest. Then his hand pointed toward the outside and made a silent motion. "We fight together." That was what he meant. She took the weapon, her hands shaking and her heart pounding. In that moment she was no longer a fallen princess, and he was no longer a lost soldier. They were just two lives standing between death and survival, together in the firelight, waiting for the storm. The jungle slept, but the danger did not. Its breath moved in the wind, its eyes watched from the trees, and its voice echoed in the sound of metal. Saria held the strange human weapon tightly, her fingers, unsure, her heart loud in her ears. She had never fired a weapon before, not like this, not one from Earth. Jake crouched low beside the entrance, his sharp eyes locked on the jungle. Beyond, his scanner blinked faster, now each flash a whisper of warning. They had come for her again. The hunters from her brother sent like shadows with orders to erase her. Jake looked at her and made a quiet signal, his hand pointing to the side of the cave, a narrow crack between two rocks, almost invisible from outside. Saria understood. She moved slowly, her legs still hurt, but the fear numbed it a little, her breath shallow, her hands sweating. She slid into the crack and pressed her body against the cold stone, hiding in the dark. Jake stayed at the entrance, his body still, his finger on the trigger, his breath slow. Outside, a soft hum grew louder, the sound of zeroing gliders, low and smooth, designed for silent flight, the kind used by royal hunters to travel unseen. Voices came next, sharp and clipped words spoken in the cold tongue of the palace guards. Jake did not understand the language, but he understood their tone and their movement. They were close, very close. One of them stepped near the cave entrance, his boots crushing a dry branch. Jake held his breath, his finger ready. The guard raised a scanner, pointed it at the rocks. It blinked yellow. No life signs. He turned away. But then, a second guard paused and looked around, his eyes narrowing. He walked slowly toward the vines that covered the cave, entranced, his hand reaching for his blade. Saria watched from the crack, her body frozen. The guard pulled the vines aside, and Jake moved. Quick and fast, he grabbed the guard by the collar and yanked him into the cave, his fist striking with perfect force. The guard dropped without a sound. Jake dragged him into the dark and grabbed his weapon. The second guard heard the movement and turned too late. A flash of light, a silent shot from Jake's earth rifle. The second guard fell backwards into the dirt, his armor smoking. Now the jungle was no longer quiet. Shouts came from every direction. Saria crawled out of the crack, her weapon shaking in her hand. Jake pulled her close and pointed to the back of the cave, a narrow tunnel leading down into the rock. "Go," he whispered. She ran first, her steps unsteady. Jake followed, covering her with each step. They moved fast through the tunnel, the light fading behind them, the voices chasing them from above. The path led down into the roots of the jungle, into an old place, forgotten and broken. The walls were stone-covered in vines, the air thick with dust and the smell of time. Saria coughed, but kept going, her body pushed by fear and fire. Jake checked his scanner again. The signal from the guards was splitting now. Some were heading around, trying to cut them off. "We need to lose them," he said. She looked around and remembered something from old stories her mother told her. A ruin, a hidden place in the jungle where the first queens once hid during the ancient wars. She pointed left and said one word: "Vault." Jake nodded and followed without question. They pushed through broken doors and fallen stones until the path opened into a wide chamber. The ceiling rose high above them, covered in roots that glowed with soft blue light. The floor was cracked but held symbols of old. In the center was a console shaped like a flower, its petals made of crystal and metal. Saria moved to it and placed her hand on the center. The petals opened with a slow hum, revealing a small orb. She took it gently and pressed it to her neck. It blinked green. Then she began to speak. Her voice called through the vault, the orb recording every word in her mother tongue. She spoke of betrayal of her brother, of the royal lie that started the war with Earth. She named names and told truths that had been buried. Jake watched in silence, his weapon ready, his eyes on the door. When she finished, the orb sealed itself and floated up into the air. Then it disappeared with a sharp pulse. Message sent. Now they knew. The loyalists, the exiles, the broken. And the brother. Jake grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a fallen column. Blaster fire hit the wall near them. The guards had found the vault. 3 of them stepped into the chamber, their weapons raised, their armor shining with the crest of her house. Jake returned fire, his aim fast and clean. One of them dropped, the others took cover. Saria crawled to the side and found a second weapon left by someone long ago. It was heavy and old, but it still worked. She raised it and fired. The recoil shocked her, but the shot hit true. Another guard fell. The last one called for backup. Jake grabbed a smoke canister from his pack and rolled it across the floor. A cloud of white rose quickly. He took Saria's hand, and they ran through the mist up a broken stairway, and into the dark again. The jungle met them with silence. They kept moving deeper into the wild, each step a question, each breath a gift. They found an old cave above the cliffs, where birds once nested. There they rested. Saria sat with her back against the stone, her hands shaking. Jake checked her leg and changed the bandage. No words were needed now. The bond between them had been sealed not by blood, but by battle. He handed her a small piece of food and looked out over the jungle. She followed his gaze and saw the lights of the city far away. Somewhere in that city her brother sat on a stolen throne. But now the truth was free. Jake looked at her and gave a small smile. You are not alone now, and neither am I. The cave was cold and quiet, but not peaceful. The silence, that was heavy like a stone on the chest, like a breath that would not come. Saria sat near the edge of the rock wall, staring out into the jungle, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim morning light. The city lights in the distance were now fading as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft colors that felt too kind for a world so cruel. Jake sat a few feet away, cleaning his weapon with slow, practiced hands. His back leaned against the wall, his eyes not on her, but on the rifle in his lap. Neither spoke. The air between them was filled with thoughts both loud and quiet. Saria watched a bird glide through the air, its wings cutting across the clouds. Without fear, she envied that. She turned her head slightly and looked at Jake. He looked tired, not just in his face, but in his bones, as if something inside him had burned too long, and now only ash remained. He caught her gaze and nodded once, his mouth a flat line. Saria opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked down at her hands, the skin scratched and bruised. I was not part of the war, she said softly, her voice almost lost to the wind. Jake did not answer right away. He set the rifle aside and looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. You were not there, he said, but your people were, and they killed mine. She nodded slowly. I know, and I am sorry. Sorry, he echoed, like the word tasted bitter on his tongue. He stood and walked toward the edge of the cave. Looking out over the jungle, the wind tugged at his coat. I was a soldier, he said. My unit was sent to guard a colony near the edge of the Varn border. We thought it was safe, we thought the war was over. They came in the night. Ships with no lights, blades that burned through steel and skin. They did not ask questions, they did not take prisoners. They killed everyone. He paused, his hands clenched at his sides. I survived because I was on patrol in the hills. I heard the screams and ran back, but it was too late. He turned to face her. I buried 50 people that day. Men, women, children. And when the next ship came, I took it and never looked back. His voice was quiet but sharp like ice. Saria felt the sting of his words deep in her chest. She looked away, ashamed of the blood in her veins. My mother tried to stop it, she said. She wanted peace, but the council overruled her. Then she disappeared. They said she died in an accident, but I never believed that. And now my brother wears her crown and calls it justice. Jake stared at her for a long time, then sat back down across from her. So what now, he asked. You send your message and hope someone listens. Hope is all I have left, she replied. And you? What do you want now? Jake looked down at the ground, then up at the sky. I do not know. I came here to disappear, to stop caring. But then I found you bleeding and broken, and something inside me would not let go. He took a deep breath. I should hate you, but I do not. I should leave you, but I cannot. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal locket. He opened it and showed her a picture of a smiling girl with dark hair and bright eyes. My sister. She was 12 when the colony fell. Her name was Elia. He closed the locket slowly. You remind me of her. Not your face, but your fight, your fire. Saria felt tears rise in her eyes, but she held them back. I will not stop, she said. I will not let my brother turn my people into monsters. Jake nodded. Then I will help you. But I need to know something. If we win, if you take back the throne, what happens to the humans? Saria stood and walked to him, her voice strong and clear. No more war. No more hate. We build something new. Together. He looked at her for a long time, and then held out his hand. Then we start now. Together. She took his hand. Their fingers closed around each other like a silent promise. Later that day they moved again, leaving the cave behind and heading toward the southern ridge, where an old outpost still stood. It had once been used by the first settlers of Zero and later abandoned after the Royal Army took control. Jake remembered the layout from old maps, and Saria used her codes to unlock the doors. Inside they found old supplies, dusty weapons, a half-working transmitter, and power cells. They worked through the night, fixing what they could. Saria sent another message, this time encrypted and targeted to her mother's last known allies. Jake built traps along the outer path and placed motion sensors in the trees. The bond between them grew not through words, but through action. They moved like one thought, like one watched each other's backs and healed each other's wounds. But danger never stopped moving. By morning, a red signal blinked on the transmitter. A reply. Someone had heard them. Someone was coming. But they did not know if it was friend or foe. As the sun rose again over the jungle and the wind whispered through the leaves, Saria stood beside Jake on the ridge, her eyes on the horizon. No crown rested on her head, no throne behind her, no army at her back. But she felt stronger than ever. Not because of blood, but because of choice. The choice to stand, to fight, to rise. Jake looked at her and said nothing, but his eyes spoke enough. They would face what came next. Together. The wind screamed through the broken walls of the old outpost, carrying smoke and fear as the jungle caught fire below and the night sky glowed with red. Saria stood at the edge of the command tower, her hair tangled in the wind, her hands clenched around the railing as she watched the blaze spread across the valley. It was not natural. It was not wild. It was a message. Her brother had found her again, and this time he sent no hunters, no drones, only fire. Jake ran up the metal stairs, two at a time, his boots loud against the rusted steps. He held a scanner in one hand and a rifle slung across his back. "They are coming," he said. "Multiple heat signals closing in fast. They are using the fire as cover." Saria turned her head slowly, her face calm, but her eyes hard like glass. "We need to leave," she said. "Not yet," Jake replied. "They will expect us to run, but we need to hit back." He pulled out a small datapad and placed it on the table inside the command room. "This is the energy grid under the southern cliffs. It powers the lower shields around the capital. If we bring it down, we open a hole in the sky wall." Saria studied the map, her mind working fast. "But the grid is deep inside the rock, guarded by patrol units and shielded." "Then we go around," he said. "I have old tunnels marked from the mining days. They never close them fully. We take the path through the caves and plant charges on the base columns. One blast and the power sinks." Saria nodded once. "I go with you." Jake shook his head. "Too risky. You are the face of the truth. We need you alive. And I need to do this. For Elia. For everyone who died." She stepped closer, her voice firm. "I am not made of glass, and I am not leaving you to fight alone." Jake held her gaze and then gave a small nod. "Then we move now." They gathered supplies, quickly grabbing explosives, water weapons, and a small drone to scan ahead. Jake led the way through the hidden hatch at the back of the outpost into the jungle, where firelight danced across the leaves like ghosts. They moved fast through smoke and shadow, their feet silent, their eyes sharp. The tunnel entrance was hidden beneath a fallen transport ship covered in vines and ash. Jake lifted the hatch, and they dropped into the dark. The air inside was cool and damp, the walls lined with metal beams and old support pipes. Saria activated a small light on her wrist, casting a blue glow ahead. Jake checked his map and motioned left. They walked in silence, the only sound their footsteps echoing down the narrow path. Memories of war filled the space between them, not with words, but with weight. The kind of weight only loss can bring. They reached the first junction, where the path split into 3 tunnels. Jake paused and studied the scanner. Middle path leads straight to the core. He moved ahead carefully, his eyes scanning the ceiling and floor. Saria followed, her heart steady, her mind focused. They passed old machines, rusted and broken, reminders of a time when the tunnels were full of workers' laughter and life. Now only dust remained. Halfway through the tunnel, the drone beeped softly, a warning. Jake raised his hand and they stopped. Motion ahead. He crept forward and peeked around the corner. Two guards stood near the base gate armored and armed, their faces hidden behind black visors. Jake pulled back and whispered, "We go loud or we wait." Saria looked at the walls and spotted a loose pipe above the guards. She pointed to it and made a motion with her hand. Jake smiled. Smart. They moved into position quietly and with perfect timing. Jake threw a small rock. To the right, the guards turned their heads. Saria pulled the pipe loose and let it crash down. The noise echoed loud and sharp. The guards spun around, weapons raised. Jake fired first, 2 quick shots, clean and precise. The guards fell. They dragged the bodies away and moved toward the power core. It stood tall and humming in the chamber, glowing with a soft yellow light. Jake placed the charges on the 4 base columns, setting the timer for 3 minutes. As they turned to leave, a voice echoed from above, cold and sharp and full of hate. "Running again, sister." Saria froze, her breath caught in her chest. Vale stood on the upper platform, flanked by armored guards, his cloak flowing behind him like shadow. "You always were weak," he said, "thinking peace could save the stars. You killed Mother," she shouted. "You started the war, and now you burn the truth." He laughed. "Mother was soft, and soft leaders fall hard. This galaxy needs fire, and fear, not flowers and kindness." Jake raised his rifle, but Vale was faster. He pressed a button on his wrist, and the platform beneath Saria gave way. She dropped into the pit below, landing hard on her side, her leg screaming in pain. Jake shouted her name and fired at the guards above. One fell, 2 more stepped forward. Vale disappeared into smoke. Jake ran to the edge and saw her below, trying to stand. He jumped without thinking, landing beside her with a grunt. "We have to move now," he said. "The charges." She nodded and leaned on him. They limped through a side tunnel as the timer ticked down. 3, 2, 1. The explosion shook the ground like thunder rising from the deep. The chamber above collapsed in fire and sparks. The energy grid blinked and then died. In the Capitol above, the sky wall flickered and vanished for the first time in decades. A hole had been made. Jake and Saria emerged from the tunnel into the jungle again, coughing and covered in dirt. They collapsed beneath a tree and looked back at the smoke rising from the cliffs. Jake turned to her and laughed softly. "That was insane." Saria smiled. "But it worked." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire behind them, the road ahead unknown. But in their hearts something had changed. They were no longer just survivors. They were the spark. And now, the fire would spread. The city of Zeruan shimmered under the gray morning sky, its towers tall and cold like blades against the clouds, its streets quiet yet tense, as if the very stones beneath them held their breath. The people walked with bowed heads and silent eyes, their faces tired from years of lies, years of fear, years of crown that did not shine but bled. Saria watched from a ridge far above, dressed in stolen armor, her hair hidden beneath a dark hood. Beside her stood Jake, his rifle slung across his back, his face calm but sharp like a storm about to break. The blast they caused 2 nights before had opened a hole in the city sky wall, and now the loyalists, who had hidden in shadows for so long, began to stir, like embers finally catching wind. Messages had spread across the channel, short and coded: "The princess lives, the heir returns, the throne is not yet lost." In the underground chambers, once used for mining, a crowd was forming, warriors in old armor, elders with dusty flags, young voices shouting for truth. Jake led Saria through narrow tunnels, past flickering lights and broken doors, until they reached a wide chamber filled with energy and fire, not from machines, but from hearts ready to rise. They saw her, and they fell silent, eyes wide, mouths open like seeing a dream walk. Saria stepped forward and removed her hood, her silver eyes flashing in the dim light, her voice clear and steady. "I am Saria, daughter of Queen Alara, sister to the traitor who calls himself king." Some turned to each other, some knelt, some wept. "I come not to wear a crown, but to break the chains that now bind us all. My brother has turned this world into a weapon. He burns those who speak, he hunts those who hope. But the time for silence is over, the time for fear is over." She held up a small device and activated the old royal seal, a glowing symbol in the shape of the twin moons of Zeruan. "I carry the blood of the queen, and I carry the truth." She played the message she had recorded in the vault, her voice strong as it echoed through the chamber. When it ended, the silence returned for one breath, then another, then cheers rose like thunder and fists rose like flames. Jake watched with a strange look in his eyes, a mix of pride, sorrow, and something deeper. They began to move, then each group with a purpose, some to take the outer gates, some to disable the patrol beacons, some to enter the palace through hidden ways. Saria chose the direct path, through the city center, where the people could see her. She mounted a stolen glider with Jake and two others. The engine roared to life, and they flew low and fast above the rooftops. The people below looked up, pointing, whispering, then shouting. The glider landed near the great fountain, where once her mother had spoken to the people in times of peace. Now Saria stood there again, her armor worn, her body tired, her spirit alive. She held a speaker device to her mouth and spoke again to the entire city. Brothers, sisters, children of Zeroin, I am not dead, I am not defeated. I am your voice, your blood, your hope. The soldiers came first, black-armored, cold-faced, weapons raised. Jake stepped in front of her, his rifle aimed, his finger ready. But then something changed. One soldier lowered his weapon, then another. A young officer stepped forward and fell to one knee. Others followed like leaves falling in autumn, one, by dozens, by hundreds. The people cheered. The streets filled. The palace gates stood ahead, still guarded, still locked, but weaker now. Jake looked at Saria. Now or never. They moved through the city like a wave, not of war, but of truth. When they reached the gates, Saria stepped forward and called out to the guards. Open. They hesitated, but fear and loyalty battled in their eyes. She spoke again, louder. I am your princess, your queen by blood and by right. Your silence helps a tyrant, your courage brings a dawn. The gates opened. Inside the palace, the halls were cold, and quiet shadows stretched across the floor, like fingers reaching for the past. Saria walked through them, her boots echoing, her breath slow. Jake walked beside her, his hand on his weapon, but his heart full of memory. They reached the throne room, its doors tall and dark, the place where her mother once sat, where her brother now ruled through fear. The doors opened. Inside stood Vale in silver armor, his crown sharp and his eyes full of fire. So you come to steal what is mine, he said. I come to take what was never yours, she replied. He stepped forward slowly, his hand on his sword. And what will you do, Saria? Fight me here, in front of the stars, in front of your precious people? She looked at him, her voice low and cold. No, you will fight yourself. She raised a small device and played a final recording, the voice of their mother. Ilara spoke of peace, of love, of her fears, about Vale, his hunger for power. She named him dangerous. She named Saria her true heir. The people heard it from speakers across the room, across the city, across the world. Vale's face twisted. Lies. Saria dropped the device and stepped closer. No, brother, just truth. He lunged with his sword. Jake fired once. The blade fell from Vale's hand, and he dropped to his knees. It was done. Saria walked to the throne and turned away from it, facing the people, the guards, the loyalists. I will not sit until we rise together, until we build again, with hands, not swords, with light, not fire. Jake stood beside her, his rifle lowered, his face calm. The city of Zeroin had awakened. The stars above burned brighter, and the fire within the people would never fade again. The throne room stood silent under the golden light of the rising sun's soft rays, slipping through broken stained glass, casting long shadows across polished stone and torn banners. Saria walked slowly down the steps, her feet light, but her heart heavy, each movement echoing with memory, each breath a promise. Behind her the halls no longer rang with fear, but with voices, voices of workers, voices of guards, voices of children laughing as they peeked into places once closed to all. Change had begun. The people of Zeroin were no longer afraid, and the walls of the palace now held warmth, not cold. In the garden where her mother once walked, Saria stood near the quiet stream, watching flowers open for the first time in many seasons. Jake leaned against the stone rail, his coat dusty, his eyes calm. He had not spoken much since the end, since the trial, since her brother was sent away and the old council dissolved. He had watched it all with steady eyes, but his mind had drifted to somewhere else. Saria looked at him and smiled a quiet smile, full of something that had no name. "You could stay," she said softly. Jake looked at the water and then at her. "You do not need me here," he replied. "You are strong, and this world belongs to you." She stepped closer and rested her hand on the rail beside him. "It does not belong to me," she said. "It belongs to those who bled for it. That includes you." Jake chuckled a little, but it faded quickly. "I am not built for crowns and courts," he said. "I am a soldier. A tired one." Saria tilted her head, watching the way the wind touched his hair, the way the light touched his skin. "Then be what you are," she said. "But do not vanish again. Let the people see that even the past can heal." He looked at her, and for a long moment, there were no words, only breath, only space, only time stretching between two souls that had survived fire together. Later that day, Saria stood before the great hall where the leaders of the regions had gathered, voices rising in excitement and debate and dreams. She walked in, not wearing a crown, not wrapped in gold, but in the same simple armor she had worn in the uprising. The room fell quiet. She spoke of new laws, of free speech, of rebuilding what was broken not just with hands, but with hearts. She opened the floor to farmers, to engineers, to healers. Jake stood in the back listening, arms crossed, a small smile on his lips. She was not just a queen. She was something new. A bridge. A fire starter. A future. That night in the quiet of the Star Garden, where trees from Earth and Zero-In grew together under twin moons, Saria found Jake sitting on the edge of the fountain, tossing small stones into the water. He looked up as she approached and raised an eyebrow. "You planning to ask me to dance in the moonlight?" he asked with a half grin. "Maybe," she replied, "if you promise not to step on my feet." He laughed, and for the first time in days it sounded real. She sat beside him, and for a while they said nothing, just listened to the wind moving through the silver leaves. He reached into his coat and pulled out the locket again. He opened it and looked at the face inside, then closed it slowly and placed it on the stone beside them. "Elia would have liked you," he said. "She would have liked what you are trying to build." Saria looked at the locket and then at Jake. "She is part of it now. So are you." "You think you can fix everything?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I believe we can build better from the ashes." Jake picked up the locket and stood. "Then I will help you. Not as a soldier. Not as a hero. Just as me." He held out his hand. Saria took it. The stars above burned bright. Below them, the people of Zero-In began planting gardens in the ruins. Children painted walls with colors never seen before. Old enemies shared bread. New leaders walked with farmers, not over them. In the royal archives, Saria ordered the war files, opened every name, every story, every truth placed in light. No more hiding. No more silence. The past would be remembered, but it would not rule. In the courtyard near the East Tower, a statue was placed, not of Saria, not of Veil, not of any ruler, but of a simple soldier holding the hand of a child. On the base were 5 words carved deep and clear. "Hope is stronger than fear." Jake never sat in meetings. He never wore armor again. He spent his days walking the city, talking to builders, helping healers, training young guards, not to kill, but to protect. He became a symbol not of power, but of change. Saria ruled with wisdom, not command. She listened more than she spoke. She walked more than she sat. Together they became more than a story. They became a turning point. Years passed, and the stars above shifted, but the fire lit by one broken princess and one tired human never faded. It became legend, and that legend became the future.